Welcome. You have entered the realm of 1111 Talk Radio. Your host is Simran. It's time to discover your own language with the universe. Empower yourself, broaden your mind, open your heart, and discover who you are. Now, here's your host, Simran.
Welcome. We are in the midst of some huge energy right now. Tomorrow is this full moon solar eclipse, and there is so much change in the air. I can feel life churning with aliveness, and yet I can also feel the beauty and the intimacy of what's wanting to fall away and pull away and shift and change. And you could call that, in a sense, a type of death. Every time we begin something new, something else is falling away. And so in this way, beginnings and endings are somewhat intertwined. My father passed away this summer, and it was an incredible experience for me. He was the first individual in my entire life, over 5 decades, where someone close to me had passed away. And it was an experience on many different levels that I don't know that I could ever have had anyone describe to me. The different layers that I would feel, or how many different ways individuals would grieve, or how people would cope with things, or how he even would step into each phase of his own letting go. As much as we talk about aliveness and life, we have to make death part of that conversation, because it's all within that huge container that is love. And so how do we live into love, and how do we also die into love? Because that truly is the sacred journey that we're each here for, in our minds, in our bodies, and in our souls. My guest today is a returning one. It is Meghan Dawn, and she has written a beautiful book, the first in a trilogy, and it is titled Dying into Love, A Sacred Journey for the Body and Soul. Meghan Dawn began her life fully immersed in the natural world, where life and death were intrinsic companions in one cycle. Leaving her home country in her latter teenage years, she spent several years traveling extensively to pursue her interest in studies in spirituality, Jungian psychology, and mystic traditions. Meghan's ancestral Celtic heritage gave her the gifts of spiritual seer and death and dying guide, which she has developed with further study and practical application. She has other books titled Feminine Courage, Remembering Your Voice and Vision Through Our Myths and Inner Stories, Meditations with Teresa of Avila, A Journey into the Sacred, which won the Ashton Wiley Charitable Trust Best Book, and Sacred Companion, Sacred Community, Reflections with Claire of Assisi. Today, we're talking about dying into love. Welcome back, my sister Meghan. It is so great to have you on 1111 Talk Radio.
Thank you so much, Simran, and it's wonderful to be with you. And let me just say straight off, I am deeply sorry for your loss over this summer. I think you spoke beautifully about not being able to really, I think, speak to the many, many layers that we go through and other people go through when we lose someone so dear to us. So my heart to yours. I just extend my heart and love to you for that.
I am so grateful. And death really is this very intimate, can be very beautiful experience. It can also be something that we spend our entire lives fearing, the death of others, the death of ourselves. And they say that that is the greatest fear that we all have. And you start the book off saying, death is the presence of love.
Yes, absolutely. For me, that's what I found most deeply when my own mother was dying. was this incredible sense of loving presence, both within myself and within her at different times. However, she also went through so many different stages of depression, anxiety, existential angst, wanting to be healed, wanting to die, all these different places she went into. And yet, throughout the whole time, Simran, I found that if I sat in the loving presence, that eventually there was like an entrainment, so that she then also entered into her loving presence. And then there was a reciprocity when I would then, of course, become like the daughter and feeling the anxiousness of her leaving or her pain. Then somehow she would go into her loving presence and it would be entrained to me. And so there was this beautiful reciprocity, because the people who are dying, I think, they become very, very close to their own essential nature and that loving presence. So
There's
it is some.
there's an intimacy that takes place, and it's kind of a strangely odd thing, as I discovered, because it is a complete ordinariness. Sometimes it is a wringing of the tired, heavy, exasperated, bored part of life, because you're almost waiting for time to pass, and yet you're afraid of time passing. Talk a little bit about that contrast.
Well, I think that isn't that the contrast of our life? That we are asked to live it all. And I think that what we can learn is that all of it is okay. All of it can be held within that great container of the loving presence, and not to judge it, to let it be what it is. And to acknowledge, oh, there it is. There's the boredom. Oh, there's the fear. There is, the anxiety. And to drop deeper down, to keep dropping deeper down below all of those things until you're sitting in the very depth and peace of your deepest soul and nature. And from here, everything can be felt, acknowledged, lived, and also let go of at the same time, because there's a sense of letting it be. Just let it be. Because I find we get anxious over getting anxious. We get anxious over our fear. We think we shouldn't be bored. We think we shouldn't have these particular feelings. Like I've had people say to me, with people going through longer deaths, and quite, excruciating, pain, and they just keep hanging on. And I've had people say, oh my gosh, like, when are they going to die? Just like you said, the exasperation. And then, of course, people feel guilty about saying that. But there's no guilt. There's the fatigue that just naturally sort of wants you to say, okay, he's dying or she's dying. Can it just happen already? Enough. And with my own mother, she felt that about herself too. And so I watched her have to come into an acceptance. And I watched our family come into an acceptance. So I think there's that tension in life, in death, and in ongoing life of everything. We're here to experience everything.
I like that word tension, because it does feel like this kind of taut thread that is pulled and yet weaved at the same time. And as we're moving through that discomfort and sitting in those spaces, whether it is with a family member, with a friend, with a marriage, with a career, because death can show itself in many different ways. when you let yourself sit in that discomfort and you open to the intimacy of it, all of a sudden the paradox is that peace resides right there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that communion is something that almost teaches us not only how to be with what is dying or be with the dying, but it also invites us then and courts us into the inquiry of how do I be with the aliveness and the living at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the tension, isn't it? Um, and then I think when we really start, when we get a little bit of entry into that, everything has an aliveness, even the dying, even the death. So that we come into another level with it. So I think we move from wanting it not to be this way or wanting it to be this way. We want to manipulate life. We want to manipulate death into how we think it should be. Like I remember my own mother saying, it wasn't meant to be like this. So it was like, well, this is it though. This is how it is. Then sort of moving into the acceptance of it. But then there's another level from that acceptance where it becomes this almost this ecstatic aliveness where you realize that what is unfolding is such a beautiful process and a natural process. I mean, if we look at nature, the natural process of a tree's life and a tree's death, and just even in the autumn, with the leaves and branches falling, and then decay and rot setting in, and then the eventual dying. All of it has a beauty, and all of it has, to me, a sacred time. And the moment that we can sort of elevate or deepen at the same time into that, that's when we feel the aliveness in both the dying and the living.
Mm. And that's such a space of wisdom and spiritual maturity and acceptance. But to get there, oftentimes we are in the place of either fighting it or being indifferent. In the beginning of the book, you start off with the story of how you first came to be in front of death. And you write, I was completely accepting, even indifferent, to what was unfolding. It felt natural. It did not matter that I would be dying a violent death or that I was so young. I watched the unfolding events in complete neutrality. That distancing that takes place, that indifference that you're talking about there, can you speak a little more to that? Is that the separation from our humanity, from our presence, from wanting to feel as if we're really here? What is that takes place? Because I think you touched on something that probably most of us encounter and feel at the beginning of our own walk towards the true intimacy and beauty of death. And I really want individuals to understand that this conversation around death is about the beauty of it as part of life, not as something that's an end or something to fear.
Yeah, yeah, that's really important because it really feels to me that death is actually the ultimate fulfillment of life. So I say, death is not a thief. It's your lover, and it's the ultimate fulfillment of life. But going back to your question about the neutrality and the indifference, I think that particular episode and experience I had of encountering my own very near-death reality as a teenager was to remove the tragedy from death. That was the lesson that I really took away from it. It was removing the tragedy, removing the fear. So it was a beautiful first step into saying, yes, you don't need to fear death. There's no tragedy in death, even if you're young, even if it's a violent death. You know, we always think if somebody's young or it's a violent death, it's so tragic. And maybe, you know, from a human standpoint, yes, we can say it is. But this particular place I was taken to, it wasn't tragic. It was seen as just, again, part of the natural cycle. And as I say, it was the first step, the neutrality of it. And I think that we do have to come into a sense of neutrality, so that we're not projecting our own needs and thoughts and etc. desires onto our experience. But if we go another step, that's when we come into almost like a celebration of it. So moving from neutrality to celebration.
You went on to write, "Death and I became friends that night." Take us into the heart of that, the experience of that.
Yes. Well, I think it was really, how can I say this? You know, sometimes putting these things in words is difficult. It was like death opened its arms to me and I walked right in. And I allowed myself to be embraced by death. So it was like a losing myself in death, but a finding myself at the same time. So all I can say to it really is it was like a beautiful, sacred embrace where all that fear was gone, and where I could actually enter into a relationship now with death. Before it was, you know, something that would happen to somebody else, or it was something that would happen outside. But now I was like, if you like, on the inside of death. I was inside the embrace. And so it was a friendship that could now begin to develop. And that was really the beginning of my work, that death no longer was an abstract. Death was an energy. And death was, that's where I came, that death is a loving presence.
That's why I think this conversation is so precious, because even though we're talking about death, even though this book came about through your own mother's passing, we do go through death over and over again. A dark night of the soul can be a death.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're dying all the time. We really are. Every breath we're dying, you know, and I looking at some of these entries in the book, you know, it's like they could be relevant for any kind of experience in life where we just need to let go or let be or to grieve or to accept. Yeah. So it's life itself. I'm really starting to feel, Simran, where, you know, how do I differentiate between life and death? Because with every breath I let go, I exhale, and then I inhale, you know, and so it's this constant life and death reciprocity of love meeting love. So I remember a fabulous Irish Catholic priest that I knew. Well, he was more Celtic than Catholic priest, I would say. But asking him, where do you think we go when we die? And he says, we don't go anywhere. We're right here. And it was like, we're present. If we're present now, we're present when we die.
Mm.
So that's how I'm starting to feel now too. What is life? What is death? One is just merging into the other all the time.
Yes, we started before the show began. We were talking about the many iterations that each of us have experienced as change, continual movement. And it reminds me of a rose or any type of flower that buds and blossoms, and then the petals fall away, and then another bud comes and it blossoms and the petals fall away. And it's as if we keep doing that. And Dying into Love is the first book in a 3-part series that are exploring the many faces of death. That kind of invites me into looking at it that way, of the many faces of death. And yet I also know that you had your own pointed wish, dream, intention for the faces to be shared. Can you talk a little bit more about the faces of death within this particular book, and then what the series will unfold as?
Well, this particular book is really taking us from the moment of a diagnosis. Because often, I mean, there's so many myriad of ways to die, and I want to acknowledge that straight away. This particular book takes us from the time of diagnosis, or the time that the receptionist at the doctor's office will be calling you to come in for further tests, put it that way. And the journey that you take, both the person who is going through the dying process themselves and their families and their caregivers and their friends. So I incorporate everybody in this, because death isn't a lone experience. We are all traveling together, the family, the friends, the caregivers. Everybody's soul, emotions, thoughts are all swirling around together. I think we become so open when death enters. It's like suddenly all our defenses drop, because we become very vulnerable. So some people will drop their defenses completely and be open and vulnerable. Some may really bring in the defenses very, very deeply and much more closely. But we go through the uncertainty that people will feel, around the diagnosis, around what's going to happen, around how is life going to change now. You look at the sense of shock, because everybody goes into a sense of shock. As I say, in reality, Simran, most of us don't even think we're going to die, or that our family will die. It's not something we sit down and think about. It seems to me that death is always out there happening to somebody else. So when it becomes a reality, there's a sense of shock, like, oh my gosh, here it is now. Here it is with me. So I take a look at that and how that affects us and how we can be with that. And then really start preparing for the journey and looking at the deeper questions that rise, around eternity, around the eternal nature of the soul, around the different voices within that will come forth, and the different states of being, the body comfort that is now needed, and the changes in the body, I mean, the letting go of the body is a difficult one. I remembered my own mum, with her bowels letting go, and she was mortified, absolutely mortified. But I have to say here, there's one story I'd love to tell, because it was so precious that, yes.
Let me have you hold that story, Meghan, until after the commercial break, because I want to get it in its entirety and richness.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
guest today is Meghan Dawn, and we are talking about her book, Dying into Love. This book is a companion on the death journey, yours or another's, whether a loved one, a neighbor, a colleague, or a client. You will travel through the first calling of death by way of a diagnosis, into shock, and how life is now changing for everyone. The larger questions of death emerge in reassuring ways. You will walk through the need for a body and soul comfort and spiritual assistance if desired. The themes of acceptance, release, grief, and the journey after death are here to greet you gently. My guest again is Meghan Dawn, and you can find out more about everything that she does at meghandawn.life. That website is in the bio description, but it's meghandon.life. Definitely sign up for her newsletter. She always provides a very enriching, beautiful newsletter, and that way you stay in touch with her offerings. Her other books are Feminine Courage, Remembering Your Voice and Vision Through Our Myths and Inner Stories, Meditations of Teresa of Avila, A Journey into the Sacred, and Sacred Companion, Sacred Community, Reflections with Claire of Assisi. Definitely pick up your copy of Dying into Love, A Sacred Journey for the Body and Soul. We'll be right back with more of Meghan Dawn right after these messages.
Voice America is on LinkedIn. Connect with us today.
Do you want more? More joy, more abundance, more power and presence? How would it feel to have more loving relationships, more empowered community, greater fulfillment, and life purpose? The 1111 Mastermind community inspires, empowers, guides, and supports transformation. Shift your mind, expand your heart, deepen insights, let go and chart a new course, dream a new dream. The 1111 Mastermind community is an online portal for personal transformation and soulful expansion. Go to courses.1111mag.com. That's courses.1111mag.com. Change begins with you. Let it be simple, convenient, and transformative. The time is now. Step through the 1111 gateway. Courses.1111mag.com.
Have you seen 1111? Do you wonder why certain numbers keep showing up in your life? 11, 111, 22, 33, 444? People all over the world are seeing 1111 and learning the language of universal communication. Subscribe to 1111 Magazine today. www.1111mag.com. 1111 Magazine is a bi-monthly print publication that offers a rich, multi-sensory experience. As you engage with experts and topics of consciousness, become enlightened, empowered, and energized, so you live a passionate and authentic life of conscious choices. 1111 Magazine, a daily staple for lifting the mindset, discovering the heart, and stepping into conscious living. 1111 Magazine. Order now at www.1111mag.com. 1111mag.com.
It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed. VoiceAmericaEmpowerment.com.
You are listening to 1111 Talk Radio. Simran is an award-winning author, publisher of 1111 Magazine, powerful speaker of wisdom, and a life mentor. Find out more at IamSimran.com. Now, back to 1111 Talk Radio.
My guest today is Meghan Dawn, and we are talking about Dying into Love, a sacred journey for the body and soul. Her website is meghandon.life. And after living and teaching the pathway of the mystic for 22 years in the United States, Meghan has returned to New Zealand, where she continues writing, offering online courses, counseling for death and dying, and wisdom meditation. She also leads earth-based pilgrimages to Ireland, New Zealand, and other countries as inspired. as we go through the book, what you will discover is a few lines precede each reflection or prayer as a way of introduction. The words in italics were experienced and verbalized by Meghan, by the person dying, or by their family and friends, carers. You will find that some reflections and prayers are specifically for the person dying, others for the caregivers and loved ones, and some are for everyone. That is, all who are involved. So you can pick this book up and allow yourself to sink into the contemplations and see what stirs within you as you explore these many themes, whether you are dealing with someone that has a diagnosis, is facing death, whether you are on your own journey at this time, or whether you are going through a metaphorical death of some space or place in your life and switching into something new. It is a perfect opportunity to bring presence to yourself and the sacredness to the experience at hand. Again, the book is called Dying into Love, A Sacred Journey for the Body and Soul. Meghan, welcome back. You were about to share a story when we had to take the break, and I'd love for you to go ahead and share that.
Great, thank you. Yes, talking about body comfort, and just the reality of when the body starts to release, and so here was my mom with, her bowels just gave way, and her whole body was in need of care and washing, which, I started to do. And she was, somewhat, I guess, from an English mother. So it was a bit mortifying for her to be completely naked with me having to sponge bath her and clean her, etc. And her lips were pursed, and you could see it was very difficult for her. And then she said, at times like this, you really wish that you had been a nudist in life. And we all just cracked up. It was so beautiful. She went from this mortification into this humor. So I think that that's something also that arises in dying, is this incredible humor that just sort of can come out of nowhere. And that releases a lot of tension. So that was just really sort of something that I thought was quite sweet from her side. So we also go into soul comfort. What the soul needs to feel comfort in that moment, and if anxiety is coming, or sweet
Before you go into the soul comfort, Meghan, I want to go back to some of the conversation around the body, because you brought up a very intimate experience, and I too have had that experience with my mother. And the first time, it was as if this silence hung in the air, and I was very present to the humbling nature of this experience, the ability to feel that vulnerable, and both the experience of shame energy that I could feel present, and yet also this experience of very deep connection and intimacy of carer and caregiver, or parent and child, or reversing roles, or different things that take place. So as we move into these spaces where there is someone being cared for, the passages in your book, how is it best to utilize them for oneself? And then how is it best to utilize them in really stepping into the compassion, the empathy, and the oneness with the other person? Because we never really know what the other is experiencing. We kind of are always in our own experience. But yet there's a huge opportunity here for a type of communion that sometimes is not even spoken, but yet is available.
Well, I think, with these words, I really say to go into them deeply and to sit with them and the reflections and let them sink deeply into your soul, so that you really feel the full impact and essence of them. And what I found with my own mum was also to ask her. I asked her if she would be okay if I took care of her in this way. And it was a very sort of grim nod and an acknowledgement. But I just felt it was important to ask her only, and later she came to this realization, just lying there, she came and she went, oh, I remember I had to bathe my father when he was dying. And then that just released the tension because she remembered she had to do it for him. And so suddenly that made it okay. I think also with these words, to read them to the person dying when it feels appropriate. And for each entry, I say, really trust yourself. If you can go deeply into your own presence and ask what is needed here, and then open the book and see what might be needed, what might give them a sense of freedom, what might give them a sense of acceptance. And simply ask if I could read you something and just leave it. Don't lecture, don't advise, just read the words and let them settle. And let the person take what they wish to take. I think that there'll be a couple of lines for everybody there. Sometimes a little humor is a great way to release. Sometimes just a real compassionate understanding. So this is my aim with the book, Simran, is for each person to come deeply into their own presence, their own breath, and then to ask what is needed, open the book, and to see what would be relevant at that time. And then read it and let it be.
When you talk about compassionate understanding, and I would call it sensitivity, it takes me to one of your passages titled Gentle Movements. And I'll share a little bit of it now just so that people can get a sense. Please go gently with me. The bruise here is when you held my arm up to wash me. I know you held it tenderly, but it dug right in. My marrow even winced. And although I like to sit in the garden, sometimes the thought of on and off the bed is too much to bear. How can such a frail body be so hard to transport? I know you're doing your best. I know this. Some days are easier than others, you see. And today I ask for no bathing, no needles, no lifting, only rest. Only rest. And to really see and feel from that other person's perspective, to have that understanding, it grows our humanity, it grows our soul, it grows our ability to be present to that individual's experience in a way that's very sacredly honoring as another rite of passage that we're moving through.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then you were talking about soul care, because to me, this is kind of that bridge towards soul care.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. So then what does the soul need? I do remember just sitting in the silence. I spent so much time, Simran, just sitting in the silence with my mum and letting her speak when she was ready, giving her space. And you could tell she was going into deep memory, deep remembering of her life, almost like a life review going on. And at one point, she just opened up and she talked about going to her grandmother's, and that her grandmother would give her treats and let her sit on her knee and hug her. And she said she got the love from her grandmother that her mother couldn't give. And it was just this, and in that moment, I felt the love of her grandmother coming through she was feeling it so deeply. I felt the love coming through from her into me. So I was bathed in this love. And then she just closed her eyes and, went back off into her little dreamland. And so it was such a beautiful indication of her soul remembering love. And it was like this, I talk about it as the treasure chest of life and death, because yes, how do we recall? Actually, I remember Teresa of Avila saying, we're very good at recalling those things that have been hurtful or painful, but we don't give the same recall to all the things that have been loving and kind. So I think that this is a really necessary thing in death, to recall those things and to give space for that to happen. And of course, also the painful things will be recalled if they need to be, or anxious. And so looking at soul comfort in what is needed to alleviate, to release that, or to just allow it to be expressed. And of course, when we're going into that soul comfort, we're sort of moving into the spiritual realm. And I know many people, there are entries here for the different angels. And I've known many people who have used these prayers with their loved ones who are dying. The angel of comfort, the angel of protection, the angel of healing, and then the angel of release. And I know that these prayers, these are actual prayers in the book, to really help the person who is dying to take in the energy and the help from the angelic being, or if you're not, don't use angels, it's like an energy, the energy of comfort, the energy of protection, the energy of healing, to really take that in. And then I think what happens is that the whole family takes it in too, because we all need that comfort and we all need the healing as we're moving through the death with a loved one.
I recently had a guest a few months ago who wrote a book called Death Nesting. And it was about very much how we nest when we are expectant mothers and we begin to nest to prepare for the child that's coming. That there's also a process of nesting that has to take place, meaning to prepare the space. It was a book about much of the physicality that is required as you are a caregiver for someone that is transitioning. And it's a wonderful book in how it provides that practical application. Your book brings that heartful, soulful intimacy. It's the tenderness, it's the breath that is taking place of the other person or of oneself as they're moving through that. And so I find this to be, many of the poems that you've written and many of the words and titles, I find them to be not only therapeutic, but also very, very holy in a nature of a different kind of pathway being laid after the nesting has been laid. This is now the preparing, the stewarding, the sacred walk, and the ushering that is required, to really be present to what is unfolding. It's the sacred witness.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, the most common words I hear, Simran, is when somebody is dying, is that someone will come to me and say, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And that to me is the greatest tragedy, is that our culture has left us bereft of this wisdom and this knowing what to do. Yet I say that wisdom is there and the wisdom is within us. And so part of this book is also reminding us, saying, yes, you do know, you can enter into this wisdom. And so I'm hoping that these words will help also draw forth the inner wisdom from each one of us, so that we do know what to do in the moment. And that's where the book also goes into, the time of the release, and how to be with that, and how to help the soul unwind the energy so that it can now transition. So very simple words and ways to help that soul now release and move on into the other dimensional realities that are there for them. So I think that's important, because that's also an area where people are sort of a bit bereft, like, well, now that they've died, now what do I do? There's this big sort of emptiness. And there's a twofold thing there of we can help the soul move on with simple words and prayers. And also, then too, we need to take care of ourselves and nurture our own selves, because, like you made the comparison, the birthing and the deathing, they're big business, they really take a lot of energy on every single level, the physical, the emotional, the spiritual level, and exhaustion can set in. So the book also talks about that self-care, and the celebration, the need for grieving, and I go into the different ways of grieving, and then the celebration, and reminding that we, as that soul who has died has an afterlife, that we also have an afterlife. We have an afterlife here. And how can we then best enter into that afterlife here that will honor the person who has died, honor the relationship we've had, and honor our own ongoing life.
You write in the book that this is a journey of courage. It's no simple or easy feat, and yet each one of us rise to that heroic yet humble space of witnessing another pass, watching our own bodies age, and pieces and parts start to let go. And it is an opportunity to gain that strength that you say, to laugh, to cry, to let the body go, to know that both life and death love you.
Yes.
And I don't know that people realize that both life and death can love you.
Yeah, most important. That is most important. And I think something here that I think I write it in the book is like, your body isn't the enemy. Your body doesn't want you to hurt. Your body actually is still your friend, even when it's letting go. So I think that's important too, and that can help open to a greater love and a greater acceptance within that. And so this book also, I think, is very good for anybody who even wants to start contemplating their own death and start preparing for that, so that you are in a better place when that happens, so that it's not going to be so shocking, so that you have contemplated the different stages you might be going through. And I want to also go on. I know you said for the trilogy, what else was being written? You see, right towards the end of this book, it's like, yes, how do we help souls move through? The next book is actually on my work of being a psychopomp, and that to me is an awful word for some reason, but somebody who helps souls on the other side of the veil. So the next book is actually looking at how we can learn from the journey of souls as they move through the bardos or different realms, and how we can actually assist them with our prayers. So that's the next book in the trilogy, and then there will be simple rituals and prayers for the dying will be the third volume. So it's going to be quite
a powerful series, and each with its own distinct empowerment for anyone that is on this path and desiring to discover more. I want to go back to what you said about the body, because I do find that it's easy to get frustrated with the body, and that I do hear people talk about their bodies generally, but especially those that are aging. Oftentimes there are those frustrating, derogatory, angry comments of, why isn't this working anymore? Or, what else is going to go next? That kind of thing, rather than the compassionate presence, the kindness, the gentleness, the lovingness toward oneself as we move toward this season of molting that allows us to really become more present to ourselves, for so many things, like this process of aging and even contemplating one's own end. What are the gifts in that can come about that are beyond the contemplation of it? What can we discover about life that we might have missed in our fast-paced youth, or our middle-aged attainment, or the tumbles and turns that life can bring? What does the spiritual maturity and the presence and the slowing actually give us that we wanted all along, but we're too quick to notice?
Well, I notice myself, Simran, if I need to listen more, my body will stop. It will get sick. It will start to falter, so that it makes me sit still, so that I can't do anything, so that I have to just be. And in the being, that inner voice, that inner direction is now able to be heard. So it actually, it's actually a great gift that I'm given, and often I go, well, why do I need to get sick to hear this, So now I spend a lot more time being willing just to sit, because that really brings the wisdom, the knowing. It also brings a great sense of timing, of when to move and when to be in repose.
You have in the book actually a section where you talk about the waiting, and you're speaking of it in terms of someone who is in the process, and the waiting that goes along with it, and how it is a time for making peace in different ways. And what you've just said about the listening, like it just feels interwoven, like a beautiful braid that is coming together as we slow and notice these moments more often.
Yes, yeah. I think it's essential for all of us right now in this world, because everything is so quick. Everything is rapidly moving. Everything is like, yes, now you get short reels. Now you get, everything is quick. And so, no, I'm actually relishing. And I think that's a gift that I've been given coming to New Zealand, because it's very slow here. It's very quiet. There's not a lot happening. So, it's been challenging for me in many ways, but I am seeing and feeling the beauty of that. And it is the elder years. Why would we want to be off running and hurrying and being in the midst of everything? It's like your time will be here. Your time will come to give what you're here to give, and to trust that, and to trust the inner wisdom to move you when you need to move, and to bring you into stillness when you need to be still. So it's not being caught up in the egoic realm of the world and producing, but knowing your wisdom will shine forth in the time and the place that is needed.
We each touch upon our wisdom and our spiritual maturity as we move from decade to decade. Dying into Love is a companion on death's journey, yours, another's, whether a loved one, a neighbor, a colleague, or a client. You will travel through the first calling of death by way of a diagnosis into shock and how life is now changing for everyone. The larger questions of death emerge in reassuring ways. You will walk through the need for body and soul comfort and spiritual assistance if desired. The themes of acceptance, release, grief, and the journey after death are here to greet you gently in Meghan Dawn's book, Dying into Love, A Sacred Journey for the Body and Soul. Visit her website at meghandawn.life. Once again, her other books are Feminine Courage, Remembering Your Voice and Vision Through the Myths of Our Inner Stories, Meditations with Teresa of Avila, A Journey into the Sacred, and Sacred Companion, Sacred Community, Reflections with Claire of Assisi. Thank you, Meghan, for coming back on 1111 Radio. It's always a pleasure to have you. Until next week, I am Simran, in love, of love, with love, and as love. Be well.
Thank you for opening your mind to a new reality, your heart to greater compassion, and your experience of aliveness with 1111 Talk Radio. Join host Simran next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern Time to step through the gateway of conscious living here on the Voice America Empowerment Channel. Remember, you are not on the journey. You are the journey.